A moment ago about the multiplicity of beliefs and worldviews that we have to interact with today that people 500 years ago may not have had to deal with. What do you say to the person who says to themselves, whatever conclusion I arrive at, there will be someone who holds a contrary opinion who could probably talk me out of it, therefore maybe I shouldn't hold anything until I'm, so convinced that I could beat anybody. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And part of the problem with that is, it's got to be subject to its own standard. So if you say, well, if somebody says that whenever you encounter anybody with a disagreeable answer that's contrary, then you should withhold your judgment, somebody else is going to say, no, I'm going to argue to you that you shouldn't withhold your judgment when that happens. So you can't avoid this.
Yes.
If there's such a thing as truth and there's such a thing as believing it, right, then you cannot avoid, right, the fact that when you affirm something as true, you exclude the false as the opposite of it. That's just what it is to believe. And so you're going to have this thing. And so the question is then back to the nature of evidence, you might say. You have to encounter the evidence honestly for yourself. One of my really good friends, his name is Tedla Wolde Johannes Ghebreyesus, right? He is an Ethiopian philosopher. And he was my roommate at Talbot. And he told me this one time, very interesting story in his own right, which we could go down if you want. But he said, you just have to follow the truth no matter what. And the evidence is you understand it no matter what. And that's, you have to be true, right, to yourself in that regard. So that's the Socratic, right, exhortation. Know thyself. It's by knowing yourself that you can discover the truth. And knowing yourself means, I think this is really true, and I think this is true because of X, Y, and Z. And I think that even though that guy's really wise, I just don't see why that's true or how that's true. And I've just got to be honest with what I see now. And that matters. Even if you're wrong, it matters. And so I remember when Richard Swinburne, a famous Christian philosopher, came to my master's degree at Biola University at Talbot School of Theology, he lectured for 3 weeks. And the very first lecture he says, are you willing to follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it leads to atheism? Because that's the right attitude. And I think he was right. Or like Aristotle says, doubt is the beginning of truth, right? It's the beginning, not the end, right? So I think we have to just be honest with what we have in front of us now, what we think at all levels, right? And so I think that think of it this way, your soul is this big, an interior castle, okay? It's a huge reality, as Dallas Willard used to say. He said it's you could talk about your soul all day without stopping if somebody asks you how you're feeling, and you could just talk about it forever. It's that big, right? So we don't think of it as this like tiny thing inside of my skull or something. It's huge, right? And so that itself has realities in it at all different levels. So call that the investigation of that, right? The introspective way. And the introspective way, of course, is part of the journey of the mind to God. So we have the outside stuff, right? Start with creatures and all them and how they work and how they're vestiges of God and how they can lead you to believe at least minimal things like there has to be something more than this dependent physical stuff for there to be this dependent physical stuff, right? So there's like the world is, as Willard says, ontologically haunted. You can't just be a physicalist down to the ground. That doesn't make sense. But it doesn't get you a personal God yet. So you can start with the external way, right? The extroversion out here. But then you get into your own soul, its nature, how it works, right? And then, of course, everything that can be in that, which is all your experiences, all the evidence, right? All the things, all the conversations, the little things that aren't explainable except by Christianity, or all these little things are all in this history, right? How to understand the rise and fall of nations. This is all in your soul, and you're trying to make sense of it. To me, that being honest with yourself is taking account of all of that as much as possible and being honest with what you know and what you don't know.
Gosh, it sounds so overwhelming. You can see why someone's like, I'm just going to go home and get drunk.
Well, I'm a philosopher, so I hang out here all the time. But I think that people are right to ignore certain conversations. Yeah. Right. So as you said a while ago, like, I just don't care about certain conversations. Yeah. So to me, I
don't mean to not care.
Socrates didn't say he didn't care about theology. He said, I don't know about things in the underworld.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. And what makes me wise, if I'm wise in any way, is that I say I don't know that stuff.
Yeah.
But what I do know is it's wicked and shameful to do a wrong thing. Yeah. I do know that. Right. And I do know that we should always obey our superiors, be they gods or men. I do know that. Right. And so he had a certain realm of knowledge he was confident on. And he said, and we need to practice philosophy, which is being willing to stand, right, on your ground when it concerns matters that do that you do care about, which is what am I going to die for? Sure, maybe there's aliens and that's a fascinating discussion, right? But what are the issues that I'm going to die for, right? Those are the ones that we definitely should care about, and other ones maybe we shouldn't, right? We should put a priority list. And if people are working and people aren't scholars and people aren't philosophers, well, they have to prioritize, right? And of course, then they're putting the good the highest, which is tells you what are your priorities. What's the order of goods? Well, maybe it would be wrong for you to study the existence of God because it's detracting from your life in a certain way. Or maybe what Dallas Willard told me once, right, is if studying the Bible is distracting you from loving Jesus, well, just don't study it for a while. Just give it up for a while and try to pray and love Jesus, right? So we have to keep our priorities straight. So it doesn't mean everybody has to be a scholar, everybody has to be a philosopher, everybody has to go throughout this whole realm, but you better not ignore the things that are important. And it's okay to ignore other things that are less important for the sake of a higher thing, right? And I think anybody can do that.
Thanks so much for watching. Please like if you liked, and if you loved, subscribe.